Let us, let us begin. I would first like to welcome to the floor Senator Balint.
Good morning. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Senator Becca Balint. I represent Windham County, and I'm the current President Pro Tem of the Senate. And I thought it would be helpful this morning by just starting by stating the obvious, which is that businesses across the state, in all regions, in all industries, are facing a workforce crisis. And we see it in businesses large and small. Some industries are being hit particularly hard: hospitality, restaurant, also the healthcare sector. And competition for workers is fierce. Millions of Americans have quit their job, and some people are calling it the big resignation, others calling it the big quit. It has become clear that the ongoing pandemic has pushed many workers to rethink their careers, their work conditions, and also just long-term goals for themselves and their families. Many workplaces have shifted to remote work for many employees, and as they've attempted to bring more workers back, and we see that in state government as well, we're seeing that more workers want more freedom and more options for how to organize their time, both because of childcare challenges and also because children being sent home from school to quarantine. And as a parent myself of school-age children, it's been challenging in our home as well on this front. And so with telecommuting also, enabling people to have more flexible schedules, many people are looking around and they're rethinking, like, is the job that I had before the job that I want in the future? And the other piece I wanted to touch on is that you've got a cohort of younger workers who are looking for a different relationship with work and a different work-life balance. And this isn't unique to us here in Vermont. It's not unique to New England. This is happening nationally. It's also happening to a little bit lesser extent globally. And even though we know that it's not unique to us, it's little comfort because the issues are still acute for many employers. So it's impacting so many businesses, it's impacting communities and families, and there's not one simple or quick answer, but I will tell you that this will be a really huge focus of the upcoming session. And I was looking through some of the statements that Commissioner Harrington has made recently about where we are in this moment in terms of employment in the state. And while the unemployment rate is coming back to near pre-pandemic levels, the labor force is down 25,000 individuals in Vermont. And for such a small state, it's huge. And if you look at the department's job board, it shows right now over 10,000 open positions currently under recruitment in Vermont. And again, we see that in state government as well, hundreds of positions not filled. So over the summer and fall, and now into the winter, the Speaker of the House and I have done a virtual tour around the state, and pretty much in every corner of Vermont, in every single county, with organizations and groups and individuals. And many themes emerged from these conversations, and almost all of them relate to the workforce crisis that we're facing right now. We have an acute housing shortage, despite really big investments that we've made in the last few sessions in the legislature. We certainly didn't anticipate a global pandemic, and with more people moving up to Vermont as COVID refugees, that is something that we want. We want more workers here, but it has created an incredibly tight housing shortage, not just in Chittenden County, the perennial place where that shows up, but in pretty much every county right now. People are having a hard time finding housing, and that makes it incredibly challenging for people to recruit workers to come to Vermont. And I actually, as an aside, I was in the State House the other day, just talking to the line cook who was making my grilled cheese sandwich. And he loves his job. He wants to stay doing that work in Montpelier. And he said, actually, this is my last week of working because we can't find housing in Washington County for my family. So I'm moving to New Hampshire. And I said, is it not a commutable distance? Can you, retain your job? And he said, we've talked about it as a family. We can't make it work. And obviously that's not what we want to be hearing from people who are happy in their jobs, who want to stay here in Vermont, but can't find housing. So the housing crisis is real. It's going to need a lot of investment. And we certainly are on the same page with the governor about that. But I want to be clear that one of the things that we're thinking about on the Senate side is it can't just be strictly in rental housing units. We really have to think also about what are the levers that we have to pull to make more homes available for people who are looking for home ownership, for accumulating more wealth within their communities and keeping it in their communities. We need a more robust childcare system. And again, this ties directly into workforce. We know a lot of parents are not in the workforce right now because of childcare needs. My understanding is about 53 childcare centers have closed since the beginning of the pandemic. So really looking carefully about how we can shore up that system to get people back into the workforce who want to be back into the workforce. And certainly ongoing investments in workforce training and education. We had a lot of great programs that we stood up during the pandemic to get people additional training and education. We're going to continue that. We're going to double down on that idea. And of course, hundreds of millions of dollars coming to Vermont through ARPA funds, through the infrastructure bill that's coming. A huge part of this session is going to be about making sure we spend those dollars wisely. So I'm going to turn it over to questions in just a minute, but I want to say, I came to this work in the legislature as a former teacher, and mostly middle school and community college. But the thing that really pushed me to run was doing work on the side for the Brattleboro Developed Credit Corporation, looking at our workforce crisis specifically in Windham County. We had done a survey among employers in Windham County, and we knew that a wave of retirements were coming. We have an aging workforce, and we saw that we had very few people in the pipeline to fill those positions. So it's work that I'm passionate about, that I'm called to do, and it's just become more acute with the pandemic. The other thing I want to say is, as a former teacher of middle school students and community college students, I think over the years we have done a disservice as educators by trying to push students all to go on to a four-year degree. I want any Vermonter who wants to do that to feel like they have an opportunity to do that, which is why I do feel like our state college system is critical. But what I don't want is for people to feel that that's the only option for them to have a viable, rich career here in Vermont. So it's what got me interested in running in the first place. I love my work. I'm really happy to be here. And I want to loop back around to something I said at the top of the talk here, which is, so my wife is an attorney. She's a healthcare attorney, but she also sits on the board of several organizations here in Vermont. And one of the things we've been talking about lately is the struggles that they're having in those organizations with the relationship that younger workers seem to want to have with work. And I'm still trying to get a handle on it, but in multiple instances, 20-something workers have said to her and other leaders in their organizations, we want to have a workplace environment that is more consent-based. And I bring it up because she was like, I don't know what that means. Like, you signed a contract and these are the job responsibilities, and you either fulfill those responsibilities or you don't. And it is, I'm still getting a handle on it, but it is this reimagining of what that work relationship is to your employer. And I welcome your thoughts and ideas. I really also want to know where you think we should be putting the workforce investment dollars in. We know there are acute needs across industries, but really want to spend the rest of the time hearing from all of you. So thank you so much for the invitation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for taking us up on it. Are there any questions for the senator?
I see Kim's hand.
Yeah, you have the ability to unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Hi, Senator. As you were traveling around, something that you said at the very end there struck me, the youth that are coming in. As a business owner, I'm sort of protected from learning about what it is that the employees want, but
Yeah.
what are you seeing about pay rates? Because I think there is a huge impact about the expectations of the youth that are coming in. I mean, of a generation of the nearing more towards the retirement, we've always been like, you go to work, you get a paycheck, and you do your job. And I see a very different attitude of the expectations. And how do you think, is anybody addressing that?
Yeah.
Because as a business owner, the employees are pricing us out of hiring them.
No, I understand what you're saying. I know that, wages in so many sectors are at an all-time high right now. And it's still, you can offer $20 an hour to wash dishes and you still may not have anyone coming in the door to want to do that. And so that is real. One thing that I've been trying to dive into more, Kim, is understanding the precarious situation that younger Vermonters find themselves in terms of the level of debt many of them are carrying. And so there's higher debt. The rents are higher than they've ever been. Trying to buy a home right now without the money for closing costs and first time down payment. If you look at the metrics, so I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm in my early 50s, and I know for me, it still took me into my late 30s to pay off my student loans. And so I'm trying to hold both things, this sense of like their relationship with work is one that I don't quite recognize either. And at the same time, I know they have pressures on them that I didn't have in the same way. And so it is, I wish that I had sort of a roadmap to follow right now. And I don't. I feel like I'm uncovering it as I travel around the state. But what I think is that the work-life balance is what I hear the most about, not so much the wages, though, of course, that is always a part of the calculation. But I would love to know from you if you have some anecdotes to share that we could dive into this a little bit more. If there are other people on the call who are also experiencing this, I think we need to address it. And I'm not quite certain how to.
Thank you. Yes, and it's not a question of, as a small business, we have priced out of the ability to offer insurance, but it's the whole package. It's the demands, especially going remote with so many people, the demands, there's no boundaries anymore for your job.
That's exactly right, Kim. That's exactly right. And we're hearing that as well. Work and life has morphed into one another. And I see Joe. Joe, do you want to weigh in on this or something else?
No, I had a different question.
Okay. Anyone else on this particular issue about relationship to work and the younger generation? I would welcome any other insight people have.
So I would like to weigh in. This is Lisa Kinzer. I'm the CEO at Union Mutual, and we have about 90 employees. Probably a third of them were remote before the pandemic. Yeah. And what we're seeing, we've been fortunate. We've been able to hire during the pandemic. We've retained a lot of our, we've had a high retention. We've really looked at the benefit side of things and what the millennials want and what our legacy employees want, and really trying to enhance those benefits. Whether it's parental leave, we started that, where before it was just, it was maternal leave. Now it's parental leave. Quite frankly, and Betsy might, as a board member, might chuckle about this, but we even did pet bereavement. Everybody's attached to their animals now because they've been home with them. Yes. And so we've kind of looked at it in, pay is very important, but it is that flexibility that people are looking for. We opened back up in July and we're a hybrid, and the employees seem to appreciate coming into the office, but still want that flexibility to be able to be home. And so I think there's a lot of aspects to not just the pay, but what the company's offering in that flexibility and providing that work-life balance.
So looking more perhaps on the benefit side and the flexibility side. That's helpful, Lisa. Ed, on this topic or a different one?
Oh, I'm on this topic.
Great.
Senator, one thing that I was hearing about a year ago from millennials and even the younger 20-somethings is that they want their independence, they want their freedom, they want to have that relationship that's different. And I'm in a world where a lot of the people that are in my industry are independent contractors. And we struggle with the law around that. And I'm hearing the young people saying they want to be independent contractors. They want to have the freedom to choose and pick the type of work that they want to do and who they want to work for. Maybe there's some ways that we could approach that subject and find a fix for them and for my industry.
Yeah, no, Ed, you're not wrong. We're hearing the same thing, that incumbent workers, older workers in Vermont have a very different view, some of them, around independent contractors, especially folks within the legislature. And that is, it's different for folks who grew up in a gig economy, and it is something that they understand in a different way. So I think you're spot on there. And I know I'm conscious of the time. So I see Joe's hand. Joe?
Yeah, my question has to do with process.
Okay.
One thing that has made the Vermont legislature unique has been its access to citizens of the state. And with the pandemic, that really, I've heard a lot of grousing. I mean, I'm not there all the time, but what do you see? What changes do you see in this upcoming session to how people can be involved in the process compared with the most recent one?
And so, Joe, one thing is, I want to just dive in a little bit into when you say grousing, because from where I sit in Windham County, people feel like they have had more access to the legislature than they've ever had before. And so I want to understand, when you say grousing, who's doing the grousing, and you don't need to give me names, but like, I want to understand, like, what
Just
are you
because
referring to?
Windham County has the most personable senator. I mean, yeah. No, but I understand that, it's difficult for people, you used to be able to see people in the cafeteria and have private conversations, and, a lot of the side conversations that contribute to the process are lost. And so my question is sort of, how do we go to that?
Got it. Thank you. That helps me understand. So yes, we know that something was absolutely lost from the time we went remote until, quite recently. Our short legislative session last Monday was a really great trial run for all of us. Having people back in the building, still having people have access to watch what we're doing via Zoom. Was meeting with the speaker about this yesterday. Our goal is to get people back in the building. And so what we've done within the State House is we have converted some of our larger meeting rooms to actually committee rooms, so that people can be there, not feel like they're breathing all over each other. We've done a big shuffle of rooms in there. So the Legislative Lounge is now a committee room. Room 10, a committee room. The mail room has been moved to turn that into a committee room. And so we're trying to make it possible for us to be back in the building. For those who want to be, I've also heard from advocates and lobbyists who say, actually, I really love the flexibility of being able to watch what you're doing from the comfort of my own couch. And so we're really trying to find that sweet spot of back in the building, having those side conversations, and for us in the legislature too, hashing stuff out around a table and not on Zoom, where you can't really pick up on nuance, where you can't, make the deal, right? And it's been incredibly challenging to legislate in this way. And so we know that there may be, especially with this new variant, we don't know what's coming, but our hope is we start in the building. If we have to shift to remote, we can do that, but we'd like to do it for only, a short stint at a time based on the COVID numbers. And so just one other thing on this, because I know there is this sense of like, well, why don't you all just come back? Don't worry about it. And I met with Dr. Levine about that the other day specifically. And he said, I understand that you're getting pressure to do that. I'm telling you, your House and Senate is really old, and they're all pretty much at risk from getting severe COVID. He just sort of laid it out there. And he said, and you can't control who's coming in and out of the building. So he said, I need you to think about it really carefully. because you don't want to have a bunch of deaths of legislators on your hands, And so he's like, not to be, maudlin, but he said, that's the reality of your situation. But we're hoping we can reopen safely. That's what I want. I'm a people person. I want to be face to face with people. So
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I think my time is up.
Okay. Unless
Thank
there
you
are
so
any other
much.
last questions, thank you very much for coming. You're certainly welcome to stick around as long as you wish and are able to. But for now,
I've got to get my daughter to school. All right. Bye-bye.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. So we're going to switch gears now to Mr. Trey Martin from Let's Grow Kids, who's going to talk about childcare issues and such that affecting our workforce and economy. From going forward from here, we're going to ask everyone to hold all questions until the end, because we found that in some of these that some of the questions would be covered by the next presenter. So that way, if your questions aren't answered by the end, you'll certainly have a chance to ask them then. Mr. Martin, whenever you're ready, the mic is yours.
Is it okay if I share my screen? I just have a couple slides that'll help me organize my presentation.
Yep, absolutely.
I'll be quick. I know you maybe need to make up some time in the air here, so I will try to make this as quick as possible and pass it on to the next speaker. Can everybody see that blue slide there? Okay, so Senator Ballant did a good job of teeing this up. We at Let's Grow Kids and our partners in the healthcare community and the business community and out there in the field doing this work are very concerned not just about the impact of the pandemic on our workforce, but the impact on Vermont's workforce when our workforce is unstable. And so I'm going to just a couple of quick notes at the beginning here just to set the stage and kind of level set. Some of you I know really well, and we've spent time talking together about these issues. Some of you, this is the first time I've presented this. This is a repeat for some. Bear with me. I'll get to what I want to really hone in on today very quickly is what Let's Grow Kids is going to be asking the legislature to do this year, or this upcoming session, and then how that fits into our longer term goals for Vermont's childcare system. But first, just to the level set. Did that flip, that rolled for everybody to the next slide? So 3 out of 5, that's that's a metric that we've been talking about. Frankly, this hasn't improved. It hasn't gotten much worse. We've had a lot of investments into the childcare system, and we've had a lot of losses of centers going offline and workers leaving the state. The case is still the same, that about 60% of Vermont's youngest children don't have access to highest quality care. Highest quality care means regulated care with a 4 or 5 star program. There are 3-star programs, 2-star programs, unregulated programs that people are accessing, but we're also still seeing that there are a lot of families that don't have access to any care at all, or are having to cobble together, or leave the workforce, or go from full-time to part-time work. So that it just captures it in a nutshell, is that we probably need another 2,000 to 3,000 workers and another 10,000 to 12,000 slots in Vermont to meet the projected demand. If there are slots, they're really expensive. The average cost of childcare in Vermont is about $20,000 a year for families. For some families, that represents 20, 30 or more % of their income. For some families, that's more than their student loan payments. It's more than their mortgage. Some families, it's both. And if you have 3 or 4 kids in the 0 to 5 system, or in aftercare and summer care, the cost can be much higher. So depending upon your family type, this can become very unmanageable. And then finally, what really is the most destabilizing factor is that the childcare workforce has been, for a very long time in this country and in this state, has been undervalued in terms of the compensation and access to benefits. It's in the bottom 2% of professional workforce salary across the country. In Vermont, the average hourly wage is around $13 an hour. Childcare workers, not pre-K, the pre-kindergarten is 3 and 4 year olds, and by childcare, I mean the other aspects of taking care of people's youngsters outside of pre-K. Childcare workers make about $13 an hour. Pre-K teachers, the average is around $35,000 a year. kindergarten teachers are around $55,000 a year median. And so that's a very destabilizing influence because we see a lot of, up to 70% turnover in a lot of sites on an annual basis. People who can find a better paying job in education will take it. When you get that license, it's really easy to parlay that into a better job at a public school or in a private school, where you can, sometimes almost double your income just by moving down the street. So that to us is perhaps the biggest impact on the stability of the system and obviously on the quality of the system, because you don't see people joining the childcare workforce and staying in it for a career. It's a stepping stone to something that's going to give them a better income and stability of life. So those were just a couple of a few level sets. What we're thinking about in 2022, first of all, is that we're continuing, as I said, continue to see this migration out of childcare by workers and the closure of sites. So we're going to be asking again this year. We've done this for the last 2 years, to ask the legislature to help us with emergency compensation and recruitment tools for early education centers. During the initial part of the pandemic, the state used a stabilization fund to put money directly into childcare so that they could continue to pay workers and keep them on staff, even if they weren't able to have kids, but not ask parents to pay the full load of keeping their slot open. So we're talking about something like that would allow a retention bonus or something that would benefit the workers who choose to stay and continue in this career. A lot of states use a program called wages. It's all caps and it's an acronym. I don't actually remember, but I do remember there's a dollar sign at the end. The wages program in a lot of states provides a bonus of a few hundred to a few $1,000s a year, depending upon your level of experience and education. And it's proven really, really effective in improving retention and professional development. The second big piece, and this doesn't sound very sexy or interesting or big news, but last year the legislature passed a bill, H-171, that set some public processes in motion. One of those is a study that the Joint Fiscal Office is going to lead with a contractor to estimate both what an improved childcare system would cost Vermont, and then what kinds of revenue would be available to pay for that. How are we going to finance the system of the future? That study is not funded yet, so it's a big priority for Let's Grow Kids to make sure that goes through. I think it'll be in budget adjustment, and if not, we'll push to have it in the regular budget, in the 23 budget, and make sure that there are dollars in there for JFO to hire the right contractor to do that work. Every year, we're looking to make investments into the Child Care Financial Assistance Program, which is the existing state program that provides reimbursement to childcare providers on top of what parents pay. So it's a way to hold parent costs down. Right now, it only applies to a small set of Vermont families, up to about 350% of the federal poverty level. We'd like to see that extended in the future, but we'll be happy to take some baby steps this year and continue to grow that at least incrementally as we head towards the bigger ask. There are other aspects of implementing H-171 that we're going to be talking about this year, including right now there's a governance study and accountability study that's going on that we want to make sure comes to the right, not the right conclusion, but comes to a conclusion that's able to be shared with the legislature that describes what that future system should look like to really get Vermont's childcare programs into a well-organized ecosystem of providers and ancillary providers, healthcare and nutrition and family services. And then this is a big knock on wood. You can see that in all caps and bold and underlined there at the bottom. Congress is continuing to debate the Build Back Better bill. It's our understanding, and probably any of you who are following this, that the childcare provisions in that are not the controversial provisions. We think that something is going to pass, and we're hopeful that it passes in time, that the appropriations committees can begin the work of figuring out how to integrate that funding into the state budgets. It would provide direct benefits to our pre-K system. That's the major focus of the bill, is making the school year and the school day accessible for 3- and 4-year-olds across the country. But it would also inject money into the childcare system and provide a cap on parent costs and a better reimbursement rate for programs. So that's what 2022 looks like for Let's Grow Kids. That fits into a longer term set of priorities that we've been pushing for. And you can see it's the first three bullets here that I want to focus you on. Is that I talked about Childcare Financial Assistance Program. And again, that is existing state infrastructure. It's a program that allows the state to reimburse programs beyond what parents pay. We would like to use that to both cap family costs on a sliding scale, to hold everybody below 10% of their gross annual income, and to reimburse the programs at a rate that would allow them to pay a professional wage and give access to basic benefits like healthcare. That's what the governance study is looking at. That's what that financing study is going to look at, is how can we afford to do that? What will it cost Vermont after, again, knock on wood, the Build Back Better funding is integrated into our budgets. And then in the meantime, even if we're able to project forward to a new system in the future, there is a lot of building to do. There are teachers to hire, there are centers to build, there are slots to open up, and we will be continuing to advocate for use of one-time dollars, federal or state, to inject out there into the landscape in the form of grants or some of those retention bonuses or loan repayments, scholarship funds, anything we can do to move people into this workforce. I'll send this out afterwards. This is if you'd like to learn more about what businesses are saying about Let's Grow Kids and how we're working with the business community, you can go to this site, letsgrowkids.org endorse, and you can make the decision for your businesses whether you want to support our work or learn more about it, or just let us know that you have questions. So Kevin, that's everything I have this morning. I will send you this slide deck so that you can share it with people if you'd like.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much.
I've never done that, by the way.
All right. Well, we'll take that as a good sign. So thank you very much for your presentation. Next, I'd like to invite Matt Cota from the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association to talk about the Climate Change Solutions Act.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Matt Cota. I run a trade association called the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association, and I work for heating oil dealers, propane dealers, gasoline, diesel fuel. Collectively, we sell about 600 million gallons of fuel in Vermont every year. That's 300 million gallons of gasoline, 100 million gallons of diesel fuel, 100 million gallons of propane, and 100 million gallons of heating oil, roughly. We also represent 3/4 of the carbon emissions in the state. And since 2011, the Comprehensive Energy Plan and the Climate Action Strategy has been to eliminate the fuel we sell. How's that policy going? Well, not very good if you're from the other side of the street. We still sell.
Matt, I think you muted.
Oh, how did that happen? Sorry. Thank you for that. Apologize. So I forget where I dropped off, but do you hear me all right now? Let's try not using these.
There was a bit of feedback. I was trying to mute the next person next to you in line. So we'll chalk that one up to my bad.
Can you hear me now? All right. Thanks, Kevin. Sorry. Okay. So I represent the Fuel Dealers Association. We sell about 600 million gallons of fuel, 300 million gallons of gasoline, 100 million gallons of propane, 100 million gallons of diesel fuel, 100 million gallons of heating oil. So for the past 10 years, the goal of Vermont's energy plan has been to eliminate the fuel we sell. It's been a failure. We continue to sell the same amount today as we did 10 years ago. And that's what necessitated, or what was the inspiration behind the Global Warming Solutions Act. The idea that the patchwork of policies to eliminate fossil fuels, the fuel we sell, weren't working, and they're not. So the Global Warming Solutions Act puts real mandates, real penalties for failure to comply. So in 2020, the legislature passed, the governor vetoed, but then they overrode the veto, legislation that kicked off this process called the Climate Action Plan, and created this climate council that had to figure out how we're going to eliminate 26% of our emissions by 2025, 40% by 2030, and 80% by 2050. Failure is non-compliance means the state is open up to any lawsuit from any individual organization that said, you passed a law in 2020 that said you're going to eliminate this amount of emissions, carbon emissions. You failed to do it. Here's the lawsuit. The first step in that process is to come up with an action plan. So over the past 16, 17 months, 23 individuals and a whole number of other advocates and subcommittees and an incredible amount of hours have gone into developing this 273-page plan, which was voted on and released on this Wednesday, which has a number of descriptions of what should happen, what can happen, and what will happen if we don't do what the law allows. How do I condense 18 months of work and 273 pages into a sentence? It's hard to do, but here goes. Essentially, when 3/4 of the emissions comes from transportation and heating, the goal is to change all of that into electricity and renewable energy, and to make sure all the electricity that is used, this increase in electricity that is used, comes from renewable resources. So more and more electricity will come from solar, wind, and hydro, and more of our homes will be heated with electricity, and more of our cars will be powered by electricity. That's the plan. And if they don't, so what the Climate Council does very effectively is model how that actually occurs. So they back into the end result. So the end result was you got to reduce emissions 26% below 2005 levels by 2025 and 40% below 1990 levels in 2030. How many electric cars? How many electric heaters? How much more electricity are we going to need in order to meet that mandate and avoid a lawsuit? Well, the numbers are pretty staggering. We're talking about a 4,000% increase in the number of electric cars on the road. There's about 4,000 electric cars in Vermont right now, registered in Vermont. They need about 170,000 on the road by 2030, just 7 years. When it comes to weatherization, in order for our homes to use less energy for heat, they estimate we need about 120,000 homes to be weatherized by the end of the decade, and about 90,000 electric heat pumps. Those are space heaters that provide air conditioning in the summer and heat in the winter. They need about 90,000 more of those. So we're talking about a lot of stuff, billions of dollars worth of stuff, cars, heaters, insulation. And it's not just stuff that we have to buy. It's also the labor that needs to install that. We just heard from the president pro tem talk about the difficulty of hiring dishwashers for $20 an hour. Well, I can tell you it's difficult to hire truck drivers for $30 an hour. It's really difficult to hire weatherization contractors for $18 an hour. So the same experience that we're all having with lacking enough skilled labor force. And I should know, I run a school. That's my main job, is to run a school for heating technicians. And it is hard to find heating technicians out there. It's hard to find a plumber. It's hard to find an electrician. It's hard to find a truck driver. But the plan relies on not only Vermonters buying all this stuff, but particularly on the heating side, on there not only being enough stuff, but there being enough skilled labor force in order to install it. And that is going to be tough. And that's one of the reasons why you're going to hear things over the next couple of years about a clean heat standard. Part of the idea behind a clean heat standard is to recognize that Vermonters aren't just going to raise their hand, write a check, and hire a contractor to change the way they heat their home. That they're actually going to need the industry that provides that service, which is us, to help them reduce their carbon emissions. So the clean heat standard is probably the most central part of the plan on how to address carbon emissions coming from heating our homes and buildings, which is to empower heating fuel dealers and heating service providers to show that they're reducing carbon emissions in their customers' homes. Essentially regulation where no regulation currently exists. Much like electric utilities are obligated to show a reduction in carbon emissions for their customers. That was part of the 2015 Energy Act. This new comprehensive energy plan, this climate action plan, which goes to the legislature in January for further consideration, will require heating fuel and heating service providers to show that they are demonstrably reducing carbon emissions in their customers' homes. And there's a number of ways to achieve that. It's not just through electricity. It's also through wood heat. It's also through renewable liquid fuels such as biodiesel. It's also through more efficient technologies. And who pays for it? Well, if I'm going to get paid to go into your home and put in a pellet stove and sell you biodiesel for your heating oil tank and put in a cold climate heat pump and weatherize it, that's a new revenue stream for me, the contractor. But who pays for it are the fossil fuel wholesalers, the natural gas, propane, and heating oil wholesalers who would have to pay into a fund in order to encourage the heating service contractors and heating fuel dealers, retailers, to sell a lower carbon fuel. And that's a tax. And given the prices today, the legislature will have to make that determination, whether they think the plan, this clean heat plan, again, to incentivize contractors to do this work to reduce carbon emissions and require heating oil wholesalers and propane and natural gas wholesalers to pay the bill, naturally raising the cost of heating fuel. Whether or not that gets approved all depends on the legislature and whether they're willing to raise the cost of, but it's the same thing with transportation. So on the transportation side, we need 170,000 electric vehicles according to the plan in order to meet our carbon reduction mandates. Well, how are you going to do that? Well, first of all, Detroit and everywhere else has to produce enough of these electric cars. But secondly, you need to encourage people to purchase them. And one of the easiest ways to, or one of the best ways to encourage people to not buy something and buy something else is to raise the tax. So there's a proposal to raise the fee if you want to register a motor vehicle with an internal combustion engine, and then take that extra fee that you're paying and give it to your neighbor who wants to register an electric vehicle. But even that might not work. So that's why the plan also wants the legislature to adopt a 2035 deadline, as proposed in California, may soon be adopted in Vermont, for no more sales of new cars with combustion engines. This is the net zero mandate, or the California Clean Car 2 standard, which sets a deadline, as has happened in other countries, saying after this date, no more new electric vehicle sales. Still buy a used car with a gasoline engine or a diesel engine, but no more new car sales. So these are some of the real consequences. This is some of the planning that's been done, but none of it takes effect if it has money attached to it, and that's a fee, until the legislature acts. If the legislature fails to act because they don't want to raise taxes and fees on essential commodities such as gasoline, diesel fuel, heating oil, and propane, then the state is open to a lawsuit for failure to act, or they change the law. And that's what will all play out in the next 4 months. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. Next up, we have Betsy Bishop, Executive Director of the Vermont Chamber of Commerce, who's here to talk about housing.
Thank you. Boy, I'm out of breath listening to Matt Cota about all that's going to happen in the next 4 months. I don't know about all of you, but I often talk about the workforce and the labor shortage, and I was heartened to hear Senator Ballant talk about that as one of their priorities. And oftentimes with the workforce, we think about, well, what can we do? And, her answer in part was, well, we need to put more money in training. And we support that. But at the end of the day, we need more people to support. And there's not a really neat legislative solution to producing more people today to get into the workforce. So we're really looking at other things, and the other things that impact that workforce shortage for us are housing, broadband, and childcare. And you've heard Trey talk about childcare. I think everybody knows the plight of broadband. So I'm going to talk a little bit about housing today. I profess not to be a housing expert, but I want to tie that a little bit to the workforce. It is the largest problem. We hear it constantly about, I can't afford my rent. I can't find a place to stay. I hear that in the professional sector. And we've had major investments in housing in this state, where we have state dollars being invested into affordable housing. We've had that for years and years and years. Along comes the federal funding, the ARPA funding last year. And there have been additional sources of revenue. So last year alone, $140 million went into housing. 74 million of that went toward housing the homeless, and the balance of that toward housing development. You've seen a lot of when we hear about housing solutions, if you read Digger or listen to VPR, whatever your news source is for Vermont news, we often, over the last 6 to 9 months, have been hearing a lot about the homeless population. And that's because we've had a lot of changes due to the pandemic, but also because of this injection of cash. But that sort of only tells part of the story, because the people who are in our workforce, the people we need more of, the labor shortage that we're experiencing, it's because there's not enough sort of middle pricing, variety pricing of housing. And that's something that we focus on as well. And there have been some highlights probably about 4 or 5 years ago when the governor in his first term, there was a $30 million housing bond, something that was suggested from our Vermont Futures project that went through. That was for what we call workforce housing or professional housing, for something slightly above that rent subsidy, that affordable housing level. But we don't see as much of that as we need. The Futures Project tells us that we build about 1,900 homes a year, 1,900 housing units a year in Vermont, and yet we need about 5,000 housing units a year. So that number hasn't really creeped up. And so, you know, the VAR, the Vermont Association of Realtors, has done a really excellent report on this. And if you haven't seen it, I would encourage going to their website and getting it. But they really discuss the various types of housing, the need to build a variety of types of housing, and the importance of home ownership for a robust economy and for prosperity for individuals, particularly for those people who are working. So I learned a lot reading that report, and I think you would too if this is an area of interest to you. So what are the barriers that are keeping us from building more and more housing? And I think this is the part of the conversation that we often throw out the term Act 250. It's a little bit broader than that. There's cost and there's regulation. So on the cost side, here we go again, right? Labor shortages. Yes, it's tied to absolutely everything. So there's a shortage of labor. The labor that is in the construction industry, in the housing construction industry, and quite frankly, every industry in Vermont is aging. We are one of the oldest states in the country, and those demographics are very hard to change because as you age, you have less babies. So if we had a young population, we might be seeing more of that. So absent a mandate for more people to have more babies, it's hard to just have that natural producing of more workers. Plus, that's a 20-year timeline. So labor shortage is certainly one of them. We've also heard about the disruption in the global supply chain, and you hear it about every single industry, right? So I'm sure, Matt, you'll talk a little bit more about this in the construction industry, but it impacts housing as well. And then in addition to cost, there is regulation. And so this is where permitting comes in, and it's a little bit broader than just Act 250, right? So there's Act 250 permitting, there's A&R permitting, and then there's what happens in the zoning regulations in municipalities and permitting there. And one of the things that I hear from developers who are members of ours is that this constant tussle and friction is where the process really slows down. There's no real best practice for who goes first. Is it the municipality? Do you get your A&R permits? Does it go through Act 250? Do you have to circle back around again? And this adds a lot of confusion and cost to the system. And this is the area that we think that you can really make some headway. I think this all comes under in streamlining the process. We hear that code word. I've heard that code word. I've been doing this work for such a long time. I think I've been hearing about streamlining the permitting process, since my youth. And the problem is that it's very difficult to do when you're touching some of these regulations that protect our environment. And I think what's interesting about this legislative session is there seems to be a willingness by some in the legislature to look at how we address the permitting process around density in our downtowns and in our other designated areas. We have plenty of various designations, and really looking at how we can capitalize on that. Some of the towns are looking at their planning documents and their zoning regulations to increase density, and there's a pushback on that. But if we want to grow in Vermont, where is the easiest place for us to grow? It's where there's already that infrastructure. So you think about the infrastructure bill that was passed at the federal government, and it's going to bring a lot of an injection of capital into the state for, yes, traditional roads and bridges, but also for a whole lot. We're going to see that in broadband, we're going to see that in water and sewer, and all of those things are needed to grow in the housing industry, as well as just in overall economic development and business. So we are looking at those pieces as well. The Vermont Association of Realtors also put out a document by a group of planners around the state that had very specific suggestions for statute changes that might help in this area. So if anybody needs those documents, I encourage you to talk to Peter Tucker at the Vermont Association of Realtors. I can give them to you. I can get them to Kevin, whatever, if this is your cup of tea. A couple of other ideas that I just sort of wanted to touch on quickly about what's impacting the housing market. There was an article in Vermont Digger earlier this week about how the Williston town suites was sold for $13.5 million to turn into housing for homeless, affordable housing, and other designations. We've seen that trick a couple of times where we're taking I've usually seen it in sort of older motel type lodging establishments and turning them into housing. And I think that strategy is a good one. As that older motel model is not, something that tourists are really clamoring for. So we're seeing lodging properties coming offline and going into housing and residential. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And so that is interesting. And, there was one recently done in Manchester that is run up against quite a few zoning problems and neighbor discussions about that. So, it's interesting. Like, I'm okay with having, a hotel with 70 rooms next to me, but I don't know about having housing with 70 or 50 independent housing there. So those are things that are coming up and impacting how we look at that. In that same vein, we tried to get a short-term rental registry through the legislature last year. It was part of a larger housing bill, and really looking at how we start to understand the short-term rental market. This is your Airbnbs, your VRBOs, and what is happening in that market. And the governor vetoed the bill. And frankly, he vetoed the bill mostly because of the short-term rental piece. And, he vetoed the bill in the sense that, well, I want to protect the mom and pops who are renting a room in their house in order to pay their property taxes. I agree, there probably are some of those people in Vermont, but frankly, it's a massive business. And it's what the tourist population wants. They want to rent out that home. And the information is that very, very few of them want to rent a room in your house for a week's vacation. They actually want their own, they want your house for that time period. But we don't know that because we don't have a registry and we don't have that information. But that also is impacting sort of the rental housing market as well as the home ownership market. So if I can hold on to my house a little bit more, maybe I decide to move to Florida for 6 months of the year and I can now rent out my house. Maybe I rent it out and make $2,000 a month and I can pay my mortgage, but I'm not here. Without that ability to do that, I might have had to sell or I might have had to rent that out longer term. So that is impacting Vermont. We've seen a lot of that. We would love to get the numbers on that. So we will be coming back to the legislature to figure out short-term rentals 2.0. That will be difficult for us considering the governor's continuing opposition. And then I have just one other thought I will leave before I finish up my time. There's a lot of people talking about the glut of commercial real estate. Back to, the pandemic, right? Everybody's been sent home from work. I'm working from home today. I own a building in Berlin where I have all my workers working and very few of them come to the office anymore. And back to that employer flexibility, we have to do that. Okay, so what am I going to do with my empty building? That is the conversation that is happening in so many places and in companies much, much larger than mine. And I don't think that's known yet. Now, many offices are not owned, they're leased. And so your lease isn't up this year necessarily. So nothing's pushing you to make that decision right away. And so we have been sort of contemplating what happens in 3 or 4 years if there is a glut of office space. And thinking about those office spaces and where they're often located in a place where there's already water and sewer, there's roads, there's electricity, there's infrastructure, the traffic patterns are already happening, the view shed has already been created by this building. And so is there some incentive that we could provide to encourage developers to repurpose those commercial office buildings for residences? That is a huge lift. It's very expensive. Office spaces are built very differently than housing spaces. But there's a vibrant conversation going on. I started with several legislators and housing advocates and thinking about that longer term. Is there something that we can do as a regulatory incentive, perhaps, rather than a financial incentive? So nothing concrete there, but some ideas being generated. So I'll stop there. Kevin, thank you.
No, thank you. Last but not least, we have Matt Musgrave from the Associated General Contractors of Vermont and the Central Vermont Chamber of Commerce Public Policy Chair to talk about unemployment insurance.
Thank you, Kevin. And I am conscious of the time. I'm also conscious of the fact that if you start letting me talk, it's sometimes hard to get me to stop. So Kevin, I'm inviting you to stop me if I go too far, but I will make an effort to stop in 10 minutes.
Have no fear. I'll just mute your mic.
Thank you. So I'm Matt Musgrave. I'm with the Associated General Contractors. We're a trade association that represents vertical construction companies, meaning buildings, as well as horizontal construction, meaning roads and bridges. We probably have, any time you talk to me, anywhere between 16 and 18,000 people our members employ. We do a lot of work for the state of Vermont. Certainly, Betsy did a great job talking about some of the challenges that we talk about internally here related to development, zoning rules, Act 250, the full 9 yards. And, certainly our opinion is, housing is something that we need to work on as well. We have a workforce shortage going on. It's getting worse. And the average age of an employee in our industry is 55 to 60 years old, and they're retiring quicker than we're hiring. And with the shortage of housing and stuff that we have up here, it's really hard for us to attract people from out of state to move here to do those jobs, even though we're offering significantly high wages for equipment operators and specialized trade people. That's not the topic that I have for today. The topic that I have is unemployment insurance. And let's go back to 2019, pre-pandemic. All of you employers did a great job. Since the recession, we paid in a little over $500 million to the unemployment trust fund. It was healthy, it was robust. And in 2019, you were issued some of the lowest rates that you were paying per employee that you had in the past 10 years. And then COVID hit. And somewhere around March 24th, I believe, Governor Scott issued his stay home, stay safe order. And many of you were forced to lay off your employees. The solution that everybody came up with to make those employees right, keep income, was to use the unemployment system. A number of business advocates suggested using some of the COVID funds to create some sort of a specialized social program, safety net for those folks. But ultimately, those that make the decisions felt that the unemployment insurance program was the best solution for that. What happened during the year of 2020 is you spent pretty close to $300 million out of that trust fund. And the trust fund is based on some goals and metrics that were put together back during the Great Recession of 2008 in what they called the grand bargain. And part of the grand bargain creates some triggers that when you spend down your unemployment trust fund as we have, that it would increase your rate. And it also creates a benchmark that you have a goal for what that trust fund was. And your previous goal was around 500 million, and that was based on 2008. They indexed the 10-year period and used the worst year to come up with what that goal should be. So the next worst year was 2020. And what that caused was, again, it caused that trigger, which said, well, no, you've spent down this money. We have to start paying it back quicker. And we called that the 2020 problem. So number one, it was going to increase your rate per employee. But number two, had we had done nothing about the 2020 problem, the goal of the trust fund would have gone from around 500 million to it was about $1.1 billion. So in addition to paying back your 300 million that you spent in 2020 out of the trust fund, over the next 10 years, you would have had to come up with another 600 million, which would have kept rates very high. Had we have done nothing, at the best experience rating, you would have seen your rates triple. At the worst experience rating, which is how they calculate your rate, those people would see a significant increase of 60%. So a number of business groups, including the chambers, including other trade associations like the manufacturers and the grocers, we approached the legislator to try to solve the 2020 problem and come up with what was a realistic goal for the trust fund, at the same time trying to keep rates as low as possible. So we had a huge 3-month process that led to passage of a bill. I believe it was S62 last year, that did two things. One was it held down the increases that you would have been paying on your rate. And the other thing it did was it ignored 2020 for the purposes of indexing the goal for the trust fund, meaning your goal is not 1.1 billion, it's actually somewhere closer to 650 million because they were able to ignore 2020. But of course, 2021 will be the next worst year that we'll deal with, but it was significantly better, as we can see in the unemployment numbers. So what we were able to successfully do is save employers around $400 million over the next 10 years by having this 2020 fix. There was a price that we paid for that. Some of the labor advocates that were around back in 2008 felt that employers had this, what they were calling relief. Employers didn't believe it. Employers believed it was fixing what some would call an act of God with COVID. But the advocates felt that it was of relief for employers, at which point they lobbied in terms of getting some additional benefit for people that were unemployed. At first, it started out as a $50 a week benefit for a parent. Eventually, they figured out that they were unable to do just I'm going to use the word discriminatory, not in a bad way, but the mainframe system can't pick one group of people and give them a bonus and not the other people. They either have a bonus across the board or they don't, because it's old technology that you probably see in the news with the Department of Labor. So what the legislators agreed to and ultimately passed was the relief, quote unquote, relief for employers, but they also created a supplementary $5 per week benefit that would start when the federal unemployment went away in September of this year. And that was estimated to be around $100 million spent over a 10-year period. We all walked away from the table. Nobody got exactly what they wanted, but we were able to get the 2020 fix, and the labor advocates were able to get some additional unemployment benefits for people that were out there. So flash forward a few months, up in August of last year, the federal government actually notified the Department of Labor that they were in fact not allowed to use trust fund dollars to provide $25 supplemental benefit that the legislature had voted through last session, which caused a significant amount of ire, as you can imagine. There were a number of committee hearings. There was an unemployment task force that was created as a part of Act S62. And they convened immediately to meet with Commissioner Harrington as well as other folks in DOL about this issue. And where we sit right now is the unemployment task force has been meeting on a couple of different measures. One of them is to figure out this mainframe issue and try to cure their computer issues, get DOL down to Best Buy or something and get a laptop. The other thing that they're working on is trying to figure out how to get this $25 fixed in there. And they're working on a couple of different things to make this happen. One of them is changing the overall rate for everyone across the board, which is certainly the easiest thing. There's some discussion about temporarily changing the taxable wage base, which would increase what those payments were to the individuals. And then the third thing that they've been discussing, which is a concern, is creating another bucket, so to speak, of money that employers will pay into. So right now, you're currently paying into the federally regulated unemployment trust fund, which they have to follow the federal regulations. The third option is to create another bucket that's completely regulated by the state that would reduce, they're saying that they would reduce the payment to the general trust fund, create this other bucket to provide the $25. But the problem, I think, Betsy, I saw the look on your face there. The problem is we don't want another bucket because buckets always get bigger. They don't go smaller and they don't get away. So what our mission is going to be going forward, and we're still, at the chamber as well as at our different various organizations, trying to decide how we go in this legislature and help them accomplish their goal, which of course everyone agreed to at the end of last year, which was the 2020 fix, which isn't going to go away, but they are going to be looking for that $25 supplement to go out. I mean, we help them and we have to figure out a way to help them get there without raising another bucket, without raising additional funds, because the cost of a full-time employee is going up from a number of different outlets, and we've got to keep the unemployment trust fund healthy, but at the same time, we've also be able to keep our doors open. 12 minutes.